Why you should go on mission is it is just a life-changing experience. You just go and you're obedient to the Lord. You meet different people. You don't have to be qualified. You just have to be available, ready to share your story, what God has done in your life, helping meet other people's needs, just sharing what God's done for you. The things that you've gone through can also be a ministry to others. You give them hope, inspiration. You tell them the gospel. It's just a neat thing.
Yeah, I would definitely reiterate that even just not only are you going there to share the gospel, God has some stuff in store for you there as well. I feel like that we probably gained more than we actually gave if I were to weigh it out. I felt like God really had me there for a purpose as well, to grow in my faith and to grow in my walk with Him, and to kind of, build a relationship with those on the team. That was so cool, is to get to find out more about your team that you're going with.
I realized my purpose was God's purpose. He has given me certain gifts and really don't make sense. I'm a really good hugger. Okay, well that's only useful in the kingdom of God. That's not really on a resume, but I can love because God's loved me, and I can hug and I can smile and I can play with kids. Those aren't really good attributes, but God's using those. And I do think I made a difference in Africa. I made lifelong friends. I know that they're praying for me and I'm praying for them. And I hope I get to go back, but if not, I'll never forget those people. And I don't think they'll ever forget me either.
I think people should go on missions because it's really eye-opening to see the need for God in communities throughout the world. And you get out of where you live and go see God's creation. And you get to see how much the gospel would help those communities. And it doesn't matter your age group. It doesn't matter how young or how old you are. God can use you no matter what.
Well, either clap or don't. Don't just halfway do it. Man, I'm glad to be here. I really am. I'm glad you're here. I got on the airplane in Raleigh yesterday and lost an hour in the air. I went to bed last night and lost another hour. This feels like a mission trip with jet lag and everything else. But man, I am glad that you're here. Like Blake told you, my name is Scott. I teach missions and evangelism at Southeastern Seminary, which is in Wake Forest, North Carolina. It's one of your Southern Baptist seminaries. So our charge is to equip pastors and missionaries and church leaders who are going to go around the world and serve in different places. And so let me just say thanks to you for all that you do to make that possible. Your help really helps other churches. See, as you give, as you pray for those that are going to our schools, what you are able to do really is help support the education for other churches so that when pastors and missionaries go places, they don't carry significant student loan debt and stuff like that. There are smaller churches, obviously, all across the country that can't pay a pastor enough to live in their community and to pay off a student loan. And so because of our cooperation together and the way that we are able to give, you're able to help these churches have pastors and to be church planters in places like that. So thanks for all that you do for that. And I'm super excited to be here for your Global Impact Conference as well. What a great week for you to have to think about God's mission around the world and to think about all that God is doing and to really ask the question, what is your own role in that? One of the reasons that your church is doing a conference like this isn't just education. I mean, it's good to know how many beads are in a jar of rice and that represents Christians, be able to see the unequal representation of the gospel around the world. But really the question to ask is, what's my role in that thing? In fact, one of the things I'm going to ask you at the beginning and I'm going to ask you at the end is, what is your missionary call? You see, we can come into a service like this and think this is interesting, this is entertaining, this is fascinating, without looking in the mirror and asking, what's my role in this massive missionary need that's around the world? And that's really what our focus is today is to ask ourselves the question, what is God's will for my life? What is my missionary call? If you have a Bible, I want you to take it and turn to the Gospel of Matthew, the very first book in the New Testament, and we're going to look at the last verse in that first book. This is a really famous missionary passage. It's called our Great Commission. And it's the last things that Jesus said to his disciples before he went into heaven with the promise that one day he would come back again. So Matthew chapter 28, I'm going to begin reading in verse 16. And I'm going to read through the end of that chapter. So Matthew chapter 28, I'm going to start reading in verse 16. So, but the 11 disciples proceeded to Galilee, to the mountain which Jesus had designated. Now, Jesus has already risen from the dead. They already know that he's risen from the dead. And he told them, when you realize that I've risen from the dead, go meet me on the top of this mountain. So it's like, hey, it's time for the appointment, right? So let's go here where he told us to meet him. So when they saw him, they worshiped, but some were doubtful. And then Jesus came and he spoke to them and he said, all authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. Go therefore, make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I've commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even to the very end of the age. The fact of the matter is that we as Christians are missionary people. It's part of who we are from the very beginning. Jesus' mandate to us through his disciples was that it wasn't part of our purpose in this world just to stay where we are. That our purpose in the world was to take the gospel around the world to the nations, to those who need to hear about it. And so that's who we are as missionaries. Now that doesn't mean that we think every single individual has to go and be a missionary, sell all that you have and go where the gospel isn't represented. We think more should go than do go, right? Jesus was clear, right? The harvest is plentiful, but the problem is the laborers are few. There are far too few people who are willing to go and who are willing to be part of God's mission. Lottie Moon, missionary in Shandong, China, said this. She said, one thing I cannot help asking myself sadly is why the love of gold is more potent than the love of souls. The number of men who are prospecting for gold in Shandong is more than double the number of missionaries representing Christ in the same city. William Carey asked this question. He was the father of the modern missionary movement. He said, I question whether all are justified staying here when so many are perishing without any means of grace in their homeland. In other words, the question we have to really ask is, why am I here when the needs are so great over there? Now, I know that as I start this, some of you saying, yeah, but seriously, I can't go. I mean, there are reasons that I can't go be a missionary, can't sell my house and get on an airplane and go overseas. And I know that, and that's very real, very legitimate. But we don't want to use our providential circumstances in life as an excuse to not really ask the question, yeah, but what is my missionary call? That's the question that I need all of you to ask this morning. You see, some of you in here probably do need to give more serious consideration to God's call for you to go where the gospel is not well known. Sometimes we just don't ask the question. But today I hope somebody asks the question, is it me who needs to go? Some of you in here, you need to ask the question about how you steward your resources, your finances, the opportunities that God gives you. And seriously ask the question, am I spending my time and energy building my own kingdom or building God's kingdom? Some today we need to ask the question, how are we spending our time and how are we stewarding our relationships? The relationships that we have with our neighbors and our co-workers, the people who live around us. Am I really God's witness in that moment? Let me tell you a story. My son is a firefighter. He lives in South Alabama. He lives on the beach. So it's a terrible firefighter job, right? You're on the beach. He has to, ride boats and stuff like that for a living. He and a buddy of his are Christians, and they're some of the few Christians in their firehouse. And they really begin to sense that their fellow firefighters, brothers and sisters, were struggling because of the issues related to being the first person on the scene in the worst day of somebody's life. And what they carried home and what they carried back to the firehouse. And so my son, he grew up on the mission field as a missionary kid, grew up in a missionary's house, but he's a firefighter, right? He's a bodybuilder, he's a firefighter. He's not a professor, he's not a public speaker, but he said, I need to do something. So he and his friend decided they would ask the chief if they could just have a prayer meeting and a Bible study one day a week for firefighters. Doesn't have to be a Christian to come, anybody can come, you just need to be willing to be there. So they had a video, they popped up a video that they showed, and so the first week they filled the room. They had to bring in extra chairs. And they said, we had a real discussion about where was God when people's lives were falling apart? Where is God when my life feels like it's falling apart? In other words, he took an opportunity to look around him and ask the question, why has God put me here? And what can I do with the relationships and the situation that God's giving me? Maybe that's you this morning. Maybe ask the question, what's it like for you to steward the relationships and the opportunities that God's given you as your Great Commission call? And there's some of you parents in here, let me ask you to ask the hard question this morning. Are you willing to be the parent who says, I'm going to commit to raise the next generation of missionaries? I'm going to raise my children to ask the question. I'm going to encourage my children to ask the question, why should I stay when the needs around the world are so great? It's a hard question to ask. It's a hard question to think, I'm going to raise my children to send them one day away from my hometown and away from home. But when we take seriously the words of Jesus, maybe that is your missionary call today. The question we want to ask ourselves very seriously at the beginning, and I'm going to ask you again at the end. So it's like a good professor, right? I'm going to tell you the exam question, then I'm going to give you the exam. What is your missionary call? I think we can look at this Great Commission and we can start answering that question by looking here. We want to look at a couple different things. First of all, we want to look at the different people involved in this Great Commission and see what we can learn by looking at the people involved in the Great Commission. First, I want you to look at those to whom the commission was given. In other words, when Jesus is standing on the mountain, he's looking at a group of people and he's giving them a mission, he's giving them a mandate, but who are they? Sometimes when I talk to people about being a missionary, they say, I really would like to do something like that, but I just can't. I mean, I'm so nervous about telling people about Jesus, or I'm afraid I couldn't learn a foreign language, or, man, you don't know, I have to eat weird food. I can't eat weird food. Weird food doesn't agree with me. But we ask ourselves the question, what type of person did Jesus give this missionary mandate to? When we think about the 12 disciples, we think about a bunch of people who were like spiritual rock stars. I mean, they wrote the Bible, they turned the world upside down, they did all this stuff. But when they're describing themselves, look what it says in verse 17, when they saw him. Now, that means that they had already known Jesus promised to raise from the dead. He did raise from the dead. They saw the empty grave. He said, meet me on the mountain. They go to meet him there, and he's there. It's pretty significant. When they see him, it says, they worshiped him. But look at that next phrase. What does it say? Some did what? Some doubted. They doubted. In the presence of the risen Jesus, they asked, what is happening here? I don't understand what's happening. And maybe that's you. Maybe you're the type of person, you're a guy and you think, man, I really would like to live for God. I'd like to do something for Jesus that makes a difference. But there is so much I don't understand. There's things I don't even know about. There are things in my life that aren't right. They're not what they should be. I'm not sure that I can do this. Maybe as a young lady, you think, man, I'm insecure. How can I do this? I'm afraid. There's so much about knowing about Jesus I couldn't explain. If somebody asked me the question, I wouldn't know how to answer the question. The fact is, if you doubt, you're in good company. That's where they were. So you're right where you need to be. But what was the difference? The difference was they worshiped. In other words, they looked at the risen Christ and they said, he's here and it's amazing. It's amazing. I wonder about you. Your relationship with Jesus. You think about your testimony, what Jesus has done in your life, what he saved you from, what he saved you to. What he's done as he's blessed you with family and friends, and where he's met you in the moment when you felt like your world was falling apart. Are you a Christian who is thankful and is worshipful? Could you be like the blind man in the Bible who said, I'm not sure who he is, but this thing I know, I used to be blind, but now I see. Do you want to know more about him? If that's you, you are exactly the person that this commission was given to. Somebody who has doubts, but somebody who's willing to worship. Second, let's look at the one who gave the commission. And so they're standing on the mountain and you see these worshipful, doubtful people, but who's the one talking to them? It's Jesus. But what does Jesus say about himself? He says this, all authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. In other words, Jesus said, I have all the authority. Let me just ask you, so we can be math genius, right? I'm from South Alabama. We're really known for our education, public education, and math abilities. So if Jesus has all the authority, how much authority does, let's say, Vladimir Putin have? Let's just do the math. All and none. If Jesus has all authority, who has any more authority? What government has authority? What scary person in your life has authority? What person that you're intimidated, who has any authority? Nobody has any authority except that he kind of gives it out a little bit and he takes it right back. Jesus has all the authority. What does that mean? Well, it means a couple of things. First, it means he's the boss. When he looks and he says about us, you should make disciples of all nations, he's the one who's the boss. In fact, Charles Spurgeon, who was a pastor in England, says this. Now think for a moment about these words, all authority. We really can't grasp it. It's too high. We can't attain unto it. Such power of self-existence, a power of creation, of sustaining that which is made, a power of fashioning and destroying, the power of opening and shutting, of overthrowing and establishing, of killing, of making alive, the power to pardon and to condemn, to give, to withhold, to decree and to fulfill, to be, in a word, head over everything, including his church. A man who has all power, Spurgeon reminds us, without exception, is to be obeyed by all of his creatures. Who's giving the authority? The one who we have to listen to. But second, it's not just that he has all authority, so he's the boss. When Jesus said, all authority has been given to me, he was pointing back to a passage in the book of Daniel, Daniel chapter 7. It's a fascinating little connection here in the Bible. See, in Daniel chapter 7, Daniel, you know the guy who was in the lion's den? This is the next chapter after he got out of the lion's den. He had this vision of all of the rising and falling of global kingdoms. He saw the Persian kingdom rise and fall, the Roman Empire rise and fall, just all of these major kingdoms rising and falling. And all of this vision was to get him to understand that there would one day come a king who would establish a kingdom that would be forever. And in Daniel chapter 7, verse 13, 14, we say this, Daniel, as I continued watching this night vision, suddenly I saw one like the Son of Man, Jesus, who was coming down from the clouds of heaven, and he approached the Ancient of Days and was escorted before him. Then this next phrase, and he was given all dominion. He was given all authority. This exact same phrase that we find here that Jesus is referring to in the Great Commission. So when Jesus in the Great Commission says, all authority has been given to me, what he's saying is, you guys remember that story after Daniel in the lion's den? When there was somebody who was given all authority? That's me. And then he's reminding them the rest of the promise. He was given all authority in glory and a kingdom. So that those of every people, every nation, every language would serve him. His authority, his dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away. His kingdom is one that will not be destroyed. So in other words, when Jesus is giving the Great Commission and he says, all authority has been given to me, what he's saying is, not only am I the boss, you need to obey me, but I'm the king. Amen. And it's time to establish the kingdom. And you're citizens of the kingdom. And you've been called as my ambassadors of the kingdom to go out into the world and to bring these people into the kingdom. They're in the wrong kingdom. Their kings are going to be destroyed. So invite them to my kingdom. So we're servants of the King, of King Jesus. Then third, let's look at those for whom the commission was given. Jesus said, all authority is given to me in heaven and on earth. Therefore, make disciples of all nations. Of all nations. Now that word nations here, it was confusing in the English language because when we think about nations, we think about countries. But really the word that's here is the word that's used to reference ethnicity. So it's not just countries on a map, but it's the people who live inside those countries. The missiologists call these people groups or ethnic groups. Our International Mission Board tells us that there are about 12,000 ethnic groups. It tells us as well that there are about 6,000 unreached people groups. That means that there's about 4.8 billion people with little to no access of the gospel. Let me tell you this. Chuck, can you give me my water here real quick? So this morning I was in the hotel. Thank you. I got a little cough. I was in the hotel. And any of you who've ever been in a hotel, you know, front and center, you have the waffle iron, right? You get breakfast, you get the waffle iron right here. It reminded me of this story. When we think about the world, some people think about the world as if it's a pancake. I like pancakes. You like pancakes? In fact, let's take a vote, right? Are you a waffle person or a pancake person? If you're a waffle person, raise your hand. Right? If you're a pancake person, raise your hand. Yeah, pancakes take less effort, right? So think about being a pancake, right? So you think about a pancake, right? Pancakes, you take that hot pancake, you put it in the middle of the plate, and when you want butter to go on your pancake, where do you put it? Right in the middle, right? Because you put the butter in the middle of the pancake, it heats up, boom, spreads all over. You put the syrup, you pour it in the middle, it spreads all over. You flip it over, it spreads over. Pancakes are easy, right? And then there's waffles. The problem with a waffle is that if you want the butter to go all over the waffle, can you just put it in the middle? No. In fact, you just put one big glob of butter in the middle of the waffle, it stays in the middle. And if you just put the syrup in the middle of the waffle, it just stays in the middle. In fact, you can ruin a waffle if you just dump it in the middle. It can get so soggy and so syrupy that it's not even any good to eat, while the outside stays dry and crunchy. The world is a lot like a waffle. Each of these people groups are these little holes and squares of a waffle. And in order for us to get the sweetness of the gospel around the world, we have to pay attention to each of these people groups. So when Jesus said, make disciples of all nations, it was pay attention to all the squares. Many of us live in the Bible Belt where we are much more like the soggy, syrupy center of the waffle, where it's just here and it just stays right here without remembering there's the edges, there's the ends that have to get the gospel to. Jesus said, make disciples of all nations. John Piper told a story. Imagine that you're a ship captain and the owner of the ship came to you one night and he said, I have an emergency rescue mission for you. There are 2 ships that have crashed out in the ocean and I need you to go and to bring back survivors from both ships. From all the ships, I need survivors. You get in your boat, you go to the first ship and it is a disaster. It's fire. People are jumping off. They're dying in the water. And you realize, I can't fit the survivors from this boat on my ship. People are going to die no matter what I do. If I fill them up and I take them back in, these people are going to die, those people are going to die. In the length of time it takes me to get from this first boat to the second boat, the people in the first boat, some of them are going to die. What do you do? When you're overwhelmed in your present situation, with the lostness of where you are now? And John Piper says, and I think it's a good question, it depends on how seriously you take the commission of the owner of the boat. When the owner said, I need you to bring back survivors from all the ships, from all the nations. You see, the thing is, we're surrounded by overwhelming lostness right here where you are. And you could use that as an excuse to not consider, not ask, should I go? But the commission is to make disciples of all nations. You see, there are those that are out there, 4.8 billion people, who are living in places, living in populations around the world with little to no access whatsoever of the gospel. They can get up, they could be born, they could live, they could die and never meet a Christian. Nobody could ever tell them about Jesus. And they would spend Christless eternity in hell. And if nobody goes, they are there with no hope at all. Nobody will tell them if somebody doesn't go. So there are those for whom the commission was given. The billions of people in the world who need to know about Jesus. Who need to know about Jesus from somebody just like you. Somebody just like me. The question is, how seriously will we take the commission? Will we go? Will we tell? Because then we ask the question, yeah, but then what is the commission asking us to do? What are the points of the commission? There are three of them that we see. First is the commission to go, going. There's some who read this and they think it means, well, as you go about your business, then you can tell people about Jesus and you'll be fine as you're going to fulfill the Great Commission. That's a pretty silly way to read this. Can you imagine 11 guys on the top of the mountain hearing Jesus say, hey guys, as you go about your business, all 11 of you, just reach the whole world for me. I mean, you don't really have to work hard at it. Don't inconvenience yourself, but eventually you'll do it. That can't work. It's to go. It's to intentionally leave where you are, set out, and to go. And then to reach. Make disciples of all nations. Take people who are followers of another God, who worship the wrong way, who do the wrong thing, who are walking away from Jesus, telling them about him so we reach them with the gospel so they're now worshipers of the risen Jesus, of the Father, Son, and Spirit. We reach them with the gospel. Why? Because now they're in their darkness. Many are in darkness with no opportunity to know a difference. We reach them with the gospel. Go to where people are who need to hear, they need to know. And then we church them, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. In other words, we're leading these people to be part of churches and communities. That's why when you have a short-term mission trip to Syracuse to be part of church planting in Syracuse or church planting in Ghana or church planting somewhere around the world. Why? Because it's the church that helps people grow in the faith. It's the church that's the sending station for missions. Sometimes we think about missions and evangelism like, I don't know, maybe like college signing day for college athletes. You've all seen, if you're a sports fan at all, you've seen it, right? You bring this guy or this girl into their gym and they're a big-time basketball player in their high school or football player in their high school, and they sit down at a table and they've got these baseball hats. I've never figured out why it's always baseball hats. They play basketball, football, but they give them a baseball hat. They put baseball hats, right? So maybe University of Arkansas and University of Alabama and University of Tennessee and Auburn and Penn State or something like that over here. And the guy walks in and he says, reaches over, grabs the hat, puts it on his head. I'm going to the University of Arkansas. Or God forbid, I'm going to the University of Alabama or something terrible like that. And sometimes we think that's what missions is. That all we're trying to get someone to do is to change hats. But the real call, the real charge, is to make disciples, to help people walk with and follow Jesus. Which the good news is that means that you can do it. In the same way that you serve in this church, we're starting churches all around the world. And you join a church planting team and you can do that. Whether it's the teaching or the caring, the preaching or the sharing, the ministry of the gospel where you go. You can do that to make the church. Now, I imagine that you may be a lot like these 11 disciples. Can you imagine standing on the mountain with the risen Jesus, who had spent the last 3 years teaching you to do things, telling you to do things, and when you did it, he told you you were doing a good job, and when you didn't do it, he told you you were wrong, sometimes even made fun of you when you did it wrong. Oh, you have little faith. Can you imagine standing there and receiving the charge, now go make disciples of the whole world? You think, what? How? How do we do that? I can't even imagine how to do that. And I think Jesus knew that's what they would be thinking, which is why he finishes with the promise of the Great Commission. The promise. And in that promise he says, and don't forget, I will be with you always, to the very end of the age. In other words, when we think about the Great Commission, we should not think about the Great Commission simply as Jesus sending us out somewhere, but rather Jesus going with us where he sends. The promise to be with us. In fact, the greatest promise in all the Bible is when God says, I will be with you. If you read through your Bible, you see many, many times when God's people are afraid, when God's people are concerned, when God's people feel overwhelmed, and he always shows up, and the first thing he says is, don't be afraid. But don't you notice, he never says, listen, there's not a single time in the Bible where God shows up to people who are afraid, who are concerned, who are overwhelmed, who are anxious, and he says, don't be afraid, you got this. Don't be afraid, you've been to school. Don't be afraid, you're really good looking. Don't be afraid, you're really strong. Never. The promise is always, don't be afraid, I'm with you. Don't be afraid, I'm with you. Don't be anxious, I'm with you. Don't be frustrated, I'm with you. And this is the promise of the Great Commission. Make disciples of all nations. I'm with you. I'm with you to the end of the age. So there are three important things about this promise that I think we should remember. First of all, this promise should be a calming promise. In other words, when we feel anxious and we feel overwhelmed, the promise of Jesus' presence is calming. When we served overseas, we took our children overseas when they were 3 years old and 5 years old. We went to work with unreached people groups. We worked with people who at times were hostile to the gospel. And there were moments we thought, what are we even doing here? And one of the two of us, my wife or I, would say, but let's just don't forget, he's still with us. Things aren't going like we planned, he's still with us. We're afraid, he's still with us. Our children are hurting, he's still with us. We don't know what to do, he's still with us. There's a calming presence of the Lord. In fact, I'll bet this. I'll bet you that in your own story and your walk with Jesus, there have been moments when you face crisis and circumstance and you reminded yourself, he's with me. And that made all the difference in the world. A medical diagnosis, a financial crisis, an issue with your children, a situation in the church, and you were reminded, but I'm not alone, he's with me. And listen, if he'll make a difference here in your everyday life, he'll still make a difference there or whatever it is he calls you to do. His calming presence. Second, his continual presence. Jesus' promise wasn't just, hey, I'll take the first few steps and once you get going, it'll be fine. Jesus doesn't treat you in whatever his missionary call is like you treat your children when you teach them to ride their bike. We get them on the bike and we walk with them and they fall down and we pick them up and we dust them off. We say, you got this? And then eventually we just push them and they ride off and we're like, don't get hit by that car. No. Jesus promises to always be with you to the very end of the age. In other words, he doesn't just send you and get you started. He goes with you until the end. What is it that God's asking you to do? What's your missionary moment today? He'll be with you. He will be with you until the end of the age. And then finally, we have his convicting and convincing presence. That is, that Jesus is working in the other person too. So when he calls you to go share the gospel with your neighbor or the person that you work with, or to go overseas on a short-term mission trip, or to go full-time as a missionary, long-term as a missionary, he's working with you, and he's working in the other person as well. So he exposes in their life a need for Jesus, and then he brings you in their life and gives you the answer to the question. The convicting presence of Jesus. The fact is that there may be somebody in here today, and what you're experiencing right now is the convicting presence of Jesus. He brought you in this building, and the video that you watched and the message and the music has stirred in your heart some question, and you think, I don't really think I understand everything, but I feel like maybe God is speaking to me. That is the convicting presence of Jesus in your life. He's saying to you, hey, I'm here. I have a plan for your life. You need to give your life to me. If you're here today and you're not a Christian, you may be experiencing right now the convicting presence of Jesus. You feel it. You know it. You could ignore it, but why would you ignore the presence of Jesus in your life? Now, all of this leads us to this point. I want to ask you the question that I asked you at the very beginning. This is the exam. Our musicians are going to come, and as they come, I'm going to ask you the question again. What is your missionary call? Don't duck it by saying, well, I can't go overseas. That's the point, right? We're not all going. But what's your missionary call? How is it that you are going to be obedient to Jesus and his Great Commission? My guess is that there's some of you here today, in the course of this message, God has already pointed out to you something that is simply your next step. It may not feel like a big step. You don't know where that step is leading you. You don't know where you're going to end up, but you know what the next step is. Maybe it's parents for your children. Maybe it's you at work. Maybe it's you in your neighborhood, you with your finances. Maybe it's you and God's challenge to go overseas. What is your next missionary step? You see, the question that I really want you to answer this morning is, are you willing to say yes before you know where this thing ends? Are you willing to take the check of your life and to sign it over to God and say, you fill in the amount. I've already given you everything. My response is yes. I'm going to put my yes right here on the altar. All these prayer requests, maybe somebody needs to come down and take a sticky note and just write yes on the sticky note and put it right here. God, whatever it is, I'll say yes. I don't know where it means I'm going to end up, but since you're the boss, since you're the king, the answer is yes. Some of you, God has used this weekend to confirm his call in your life. Maybe up until now, you felt God stirring in your heart. You felt something happening. But this weekend, God has said, that's the thing I've been asking you to do. That's it. You know what it is. Now, will you say yes to what you know has happened? So some of you, let's back up. So some of you, this weekend has challenged you. I need to take whatever that next one step is. For some of you, you already know the next step. You already know the big picture. Today, it's God saying, are you willing to say yes to this whole direction that I'm leading you? Is that you? Is that what God's leading you to do? For some of you, parents, it may be the next step with your children. Some of you may be, I know God's calling me to be a church planter. I know that he's calling me to be a missionary. I know God's calling me into some kind of ministry. My step is yes. I know what it is, and it's yes. Maybe God has convicted you of an area of your life that you know you're shielding, you're keeping to yourself. Maybe it's a sin that you're not willing to let go. Maybe it's an area of your life that you're holding for yourself. You're not willing to steward and give away. But this morning, God has put his finger right there and said, if you want to be obedient to your missionary call, you have to let go of this thing. Are you willing to say yes? Will you say yes? You say, man, I'm afraid. So were they. I don't know where it's going to lead. Neither did they. I'm not sure what's next. Yes is next. Yes is next. So I'm going to pray, and after I pray, we're going to stand and we're going to sing. And as you sing, I want you to make the step of yes. Perhaps it means you make your way to the aisle, you come down and you grab one of your pastors by the hand and you say, hey, my answer is yes. Would you pray with me that I would know where God is leading me? Maybe seriously, maybe some of you just need to come grab a sticky note, kneel down here, just write yes. Stick it on here. That's my yes, God. You put it where you want to. I'll put it on the altar. You put it on the map. Is the map Arkansas? Is it New York? Is it New Delhi? Here's my yes. My yes this week. So I'm going to pray. We're going to stand and sing. Your pastors and prayer team are going to be here. In one movement, let's make our yes known this morning to be part of God's global impact. Father in heaven, I thank you so much for today. Thank you for the people who are here. We thank you for the calling that you give to each of us as we think about your great commission. Fathers, these men and women are asking the question, what is your